When it comes to trade, many expected the Biden administration to make a clean break from the policies of Donald Trump. But as Ira Spitzer reports, there's been more continuity than change.
Every year, about 30 million tons of goods pass through the port of Oakland. Most of it is going to and from Asia.
The countries we do the most trade with are China, Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan, and then Vietnam has been a huge player.
Volume has remained steady, but it's been a turbulent few years for free trade advocates. The Trump administration's America First approach brought lots of new tariffs, including on over $350 billion worth of Chinese goods. China responded with its own tariffs. The Biden administration hasn't done much to change things. So far, the Biden administration has left most of the Trump-era tariffs in place on China and on steel and aluminum, for example. Trade, however, is booming at West Coast ports like this one in Oakland, where a record number of ships are queued up waiting to unload cargo. Even as the U.S. economy quickly recovers from the coronavirus pandemic, critics of the tariffs say they're hurting American businesses.
Economic studies show that the tariffs did impose pretty significant harms on American companies who, for the most part, bore the cost of the tariffs instead of China or Chinese companies bearing them. But instead of passing those on to consumers like you and me, just ended up eating those.
The Biden administration has so far focused more on protecting American workers than a return to free trade.
Today, I'm taking the first steps in my larger Build Back Better recovery plan that invests in American workers, unions, and businesses up and down the supply chain.
Even if the trade war with China continues, most experts think Biden is likelier to re-engage with the rest of the world than Trump.
The rhetoric has continued here for the Biden administration, with only one exception, that being working with allies more instead of going it alone, like President Trump wanted to do.
Yes, I have a question.
U.S. allies like Japan have called for the U.S. to rejoin the Trans-Pacific Partnership, or TPP, the trade agreement Trump abandoned in 2017. The trade agreement's goal is to counter China through partnerships between the U.S. and Asian nations. But that may not happen anytime soon.
There are a lot of domestic political considerations that the Biden administration is going to have to work through, particularly on the progressive left that is anti-TPP, and also then dealing with the nationalist right, criticizing Biden.
Trade remains a key part of the American economy, accounting for about 25% of GDP. American businesses rely on low-cost goods from other places, as well as export markets for products like agriculture.
Any barrier to trade slows down the trade growth. So, we promote and would support any any trade policies that help promote trade.
Despite most tariffs remaining in place for the first 100 days of Biden's term, the administration says it's still reviewing the tariffs and is open to negotiations. That could help keep things rolling along at American ports. Ira Spitzer, CNA, Oakland, California.
Now for more, let's speak to Dr. Chong Ja Ian at the National University of Singapore. Thanks for joining us. So firstly, what do Joe Biden's first 100 days tell us about his approach to China?
So I think Biden continues to have a lot of skepticism towards China. That is apparent from the trade stuff that you talked about. It is apparent from the contestation in the East China Sea, near Taiwan, and in the South China Sea. Now, I suppose where there is some change is in terms of climate cooperation, where we've seen the Biden administration and the Xi leadership propose the possibility of some forward movement. But otherwise, I think the Biden administration will continue to maintain a robust policy towards the PRC.
On the other hand, Dr. Chong, how has China taken to the new administration?
So the Chinese response has been somewhat wary. They've not liked the pressure that has come from the Biden administration. They, in particular, don't appreciate the Biden administration's efforts to work closer with allies. I suppose Beijing feels that they are being put in a more isolated position, so they've struck out against U.S. policies there. But I think at least with the positive noises made over the climate summit, it suggests that the PRC is perhaps willing to entertain some form of cooperation, although the interpretation for why this might be will differ. Some say, well, the Chinese are putting forward an olive branch. Others might say that, well, perhaps pressure is getting the PRC to be more conciliatory.
When China aside, how do you expect Biden's Asia trade policy to evolve in time to come?
So I think Biden, his trade policy will try to engage Asia more. Outside and beyond the PRC. But I think the Biden administration, too, will probably be somewhat cautious about opening trade up too much. One of the pressures that we've seen build up in the U.S. leading up to the Trump years and beyond has been the fact that the sort of very neoliberal policies have created big dislocations, increased income inequality, and political pressure, domestic political pressure, I think will temper the Biden administration's desires to open up. They do have to worry about the domestic voters.
Dr. Chong, in Joe Biden's first 100 days as U.S. president, he hasn't shown very much enthusiasm for large multilateral trade deals. Do you think that the United States is going to rejoin any of these major global trade initiatives?
So I think that might take some time. The U.S., as you both well know and has been discussed earlier, faces a lot of domestic pressure against opening up some more. There's a big feeling that the neoliberal policies have really not benefited your average Joe, so to speak, and an average Jane. So in that respect, I think any opening will be quite cautious on the part of the Biden administration, bearing in mind that a big trade deal, for instance, will also be a big target for attack by Biden's opponents in Congress.
Many thanks for your thoughts this evening. Dr. Chong Ja Ian from the National University of Singapore.